If you have ever laid awake at 2 a.m. wondering, what am I missing when it comes to growing your podcast because you feel like you're doing everything right, welcome to the club. This is the club that most podcasters join at one point or another in their podcasting journey. And in this Fix My Pod coaching session, fellow podcast host Anne Raju decided it was time to stop questioning whether all her effort was worth it and actually voice this question out loud so she could get the clarity she needed on what she's doing well, where she can improve, and how to set herself up to be able to open her analytics dashboard and finally see real live proof that her show is reaching the right people. And in this episode, I'm going to break down how you can do the same. Welcome to Insider Secrets to a Top 100 podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Elmer. Let's make your business binge-worthy. And welcome to the show. It is so great to have you here.
I'm so excited. I can't wait to do this with you.
You know, it's so funny because there are people that have been in my world for a very long time and you get an email from them every once in a while or a podcast review or something, and you are one of those people. So I have to just first start off by saying thank you for being part of our community, for listening to the show. It's a treat to me to be able to sit here and to dig into your podcast with you. So before we dive in, I would love for those listening right now, just give us kind of some context around who you are, what you do, and what your podcast is about.
Yes, so I'm Anne Raju and I am the creator of Peaceful Productivity, and my podcast is called The Productivity Sweet Spot. I launched the podcast last year in November, so it's almost a year old, which is super exciting. It's something that I've been wanting for many, many years and had many reasons not to do it. Eventually I got over myself and I've done it. And I've been loving it. And I focus on female entrepreneurs, and a lot of them are moms. And we've just got too many things going on. And we feel like we're constantly behind. And so I'm trying to help us to work a little bit differently and to work in a more peaceful yet productive way.
I relate so much. I have a 7-year-old and I was just in our school group chat. I had 91 missed unread messages and it was people talking about homework and we were so confused and we all have so many things going on. And so anyway, there are a lot of women who I know need you. Congrats on 1 year because that is a really big accomplishment. I know when you reached out for guidance, you said specifically you want to figure out, what you might be missing, what you might be doing wrong, just to get some clear next steps to take to get in front of new listeners. And I guarantee you, every single podcast host has laid awake at night thinking the same thing. Like, what am I missing? Why are the listeners not there? I'm curious, what does more listeners mean for you? Like, what are you hoping more listeners will give you?
More listeners will give me, a sense of that I'm reaching the right people so that the message lands with the right people. Ideally, some conversion of those people into my email list, because I always promote my lead magnets and that kind of thing. And then obviously some more business from that. But overall, maybe a bit more of the sense of, like the energy and effort I put into this actually reaches people and it means something. And then I believe that with more listeners, there will be more reviews and there will be other opportunities. Yeah, I think this is what I'm hoping to get from more listeners.
Yes. Okay. I love it. And I think you've touched on a lot of things that we all relate as podcast hosts. And the heart of that being that we want to know that what we're putting into the show is helping people, that it is reaching people. And so it sounds like to me that when you have more listeners, you have that confirmation that this is helping people, they're resonating with it. And then ultimately, of course, converting some of them onto your email list and driving them to your business.
Exactly. Yeah.
Love it. Tell me a little bit about your capacity right now personally for your podcast. So when it comes to your podcast, how much time are you spending marketing your show every week? Is there any budget available on the marketing side? It's okay if there's not, but just for me to get a sense of kind of where you're at with that.
Yeah, I mean, capacity is always the issue because I only work part-time in my business and I'm with my children the other rest of the day, basically. And I'm pretty good with recording relatively well in advance, and that works quite well in terms of like the cadence and the capacity to do it. The marketing is definitely a bit of a struggle, so I tend to have 2 social media posts that go out about each podcast episode. Those go on Instagram and LinkedIn. I'm not a huge fan of putting a lot of effort into social media, so that's always this like, I know maybe I should do more, but do I want to do more? And do I have the capacity to do more? And then I obviously have my email list, which is not huge, but it's very consistent. So they get my weekly email with the podcast. And then every other week, I sort of like do a bit of storytelling, and I try to link it to the podcast again to then, weave in what we've talked about on the podcast. And then obviously I ask my guests to share it. I send them a little sort of blurb that they can use for themselves so that it's easy for them to share, and I tag them and collaborate and that kind of thing. I don't use a lot of video because my time zone for me right now, it's 10 p.m. So once we're done, I'm going to sleep, and I just cannot bring myself to put on makeup at 10 p.m. and then wash it again and go to sleep. So video is often this like, I know it's working, I know it's supporting, but my setup makes it a bit hard. Yeah, I think this is pretty much what I do around promoting.
Fantastic. You are doing a lot of things well. I mean, just as far as the consistency in sharing every episode with your social, with your emails, that's great. And it's a great way to nurture existing listeners and keep your podcast top of mind. So like, I love that you have that dialed in, and that seems to be working as far as just getting it out there to existing listeners and to people who already know you and are on your list. I hear you on video, and I hear you on the whole question of like, should I be doing more on social media? And I will be the first to tell you, and I have a feeling that you will probably agree based on what you do and how you help women in the world, which is if your energy is not 100% behind it, and if you are not aligned with it, then ultimately it's not going to help you grow, and it's not going to convert. And it took me a very long time to figure this out, and where I was doing all the things I thought I should be doing, and I just had this conversation with someone. They were like, are you on Instagram still? And I was like, well, not really. I haven't posted on Instagram since like 8 months, And I'm like, I feel kind of bad about that, because my people are probably like, what happened to Courtney? And at the same time, it has given me so much creative energy back. When I looked at my business and where leads were coming from, 0 of them were coming from social media. And I had really great connections and really great conversations there. And I had to make the hard decision to say, you know what? Is this where I need to be spending my time? And the answer was no. And then I had to get over it and be okay with it, and I still feel kind of bad about it. But all that to say that I think the fact that you're tuned in to that you don't want to be spending time creating video, or that you don't want to be spending a lot of time on social media, is good. We don't want to build a marketing strategy around those things, because eventually it'll just burn you out. So with that in mind, and knowing that time is very limited, I love that you're leaning into podcast SEO. That's going to be very leveraged. Tell me kind of what you have done so far with that. Do you have set keywords that you're optimizing for in every episode? Are you tracking those keywords to see how your performance is in Apple and Spotify?
I'm not tracking those keywords. So this is definitely something that I am not aware of and need to learn how to do it. I have some keywords that come up relatively often, which are sort of like the core keywords. And then I try to get some sort of content specific keywords, because often my episodes, like I try to link different angles to productivity. So not everything is just productivity and efficiency and time management, but sometimes I talk about nutrition and emotional regulation, and then I bring it into productivity. So there are specific episode keywords that I look at. Yeah.
Okay. So there's a few different ways you can track it. And ultimately the simplest is to go into, if you've got, certain keywords that you're optimizing for, go into Apple, go into Spotify, and type those into the search bar and see if your podcast pops up. And if it does, that's great. And we want to continue to utilize those keywords. It means you're ranking in search for that keyword. If it doesn't, it could mean that you need to increase the volume of that keyword across the written messaging of your podcast to increase your chances of ranking for that keyword. And there's a little bit more nuance to that as well. In fact, we have a new podcast SEO mini course that's about to drop. I would love to gift that to you. And so that way that will help you kind of understand which keywords to be going after, which ones to optimize for, and how to track and see if they're actually paying off in terms of ranking. Because when you're ranking for those keywords and we've got that box checked, we can say, great, I know that my podcast is showing up in the search results for people who are looking for a show like this. And so that we're hopefully capturing a percentage of that traffic.
Yeah, I love that. It didn't even cross my mind to go into the search and look for the keywords. I've been looking for different podcasts and all of that. And then I did like the general Google's keyword search, but I didn't actually search in the podcast. So that is interesting.
Yes, that'll help you close the loop a little bit too. Yeah. And there are some deeper things you can do to track and kind of really know where you're ranking against who and that sort of thing. Because podcast SEO is really the foundation for all podcast marketing or should be the foundation, in my opinion, because it's leveraged. You're already creating the content, so you don't have to take a lot of extra time. You already know what keywords to optimize for. So you're doing all those things right. We just want to make sure that you're actually getting a return for it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, awesome. All right. I want to also ask you too, on the back end of your podcast, are you tracking listeners converting to leads to your email list? Do you have things set up to track those conversions?
No, I didn't go down that path yet.
Okay.
I technically know how to do it, but it's one of those things of like, yes, one day.
I know it's on the yes one day list. I have a yes one day list too. That's okay. But that is something that I would prioritize. And the reason being, because if ultimately your podcast is designed to drive traffic to your business, and the first step of that being to get onto your email list, we need to see what action listeners are taking or not taking with the show right now, because that helps us then to optimize our lead magnets or whatever next step in the call to action that we're sharing on the podcast to help drive those conversions. So I always recommend having, if you've got certain lead magnets that you share, make sure that you have a link specific to that lead magnet that you only share on the podcast, so that on the back end, you've got people clicking into that link, they're coming from the podcast because that's the only place they could have gotten that link. They're landing on that page. On the opt-in form, there's a drop-down or something ideally that would say, how did you hear about us? Where the podcast is an option that they could check. And then when they opt in, that on the back end of your email service provider, it's tagging them as like a podcast lead. And so that way you can know, again, to close that loop where it's like, well, are listeners taking action? I don't know. And then you can see, yes, some of them are moving on to the email list. And then, but maybe not as many as I would like. So that gives us insight into how to optimize the content. Or yeah, I'm getting a lot of action. That's great. Now what's the next step? I need to help nurture them to move them to the point of sale. And when they do make a purchase at any point in time, you can attribute that revenue back to your podcast because your podcast played a role in driving that revenue. And I find for us as business owners, that's often one thing that people aren't really clear on how to track, but you definitely need to be tracking this. Because even if right now there's only a handful of listeners that are converting, we want to know those numbers that we can then begin to build strategy to optimize for that.
Yeah, I love that actually. Yeah, I think even if the listenership is maybe not huge, but when I know that actually there is so and so many people coming onto the email list, it's definitely doing one of the jobs why I created the podcast. So it's going to come on the actual to-do list, not the
the actual to-do list. Yay.
Yes, exactly.
It's going to make a spot. But yes, exactly to what you said initially, where, I want to know that the energy and effort that I'm putting in is worth it. And for you, when you can see that conversion is happening, even if it's a couple people to start, then great. We want to build on that. And as you get more listeners, the idea is, well, hopefully more of them will be converting and we can monitor those conversions. Because I always say, more listeners does not necessarily equal more conversions. We often tend to think that it does, right? Just kind of how we think like a big following on social media is all of a sudden we're going to be selling our programs left and right. But the same is true with podcasting, where if you're getting a lot of traffic to the show, but only a few of them are converting, then that points us to, well, we need to optimize for those conversions. What do we need to change or do differently? But if you are getting conversions, then in theory, as we drive more traffic to the show, we should see those conversions increase. And when we see that, that's when we know, okay, we're moving in the right direction here. And we're starting to see the movement that we ultimately want to see for listeners moving through that funnel.
Yeah, love that. And while we're on the lead magnets and email conversion, because obviously I've got a couple of lead magnets, not too many. So I sort of try to interchange them. But as I record, I feel like, oh, I'm going to say that again. And, I told them last week to go and check out the productivity quiz and whatever, Is that me because I'm recording? No one cares? Or what's your take on that?
It's such a common question, Anne, and I hear this all the time where, I was like, wait, I've said that like 100 times on my podcast already. Surely nobody else wants to hear that. But also think that a new listener might be finding that episode for the first time in search. And so that's the first episode they're hearing. And maybe they need that quiz. And maybe they would be really interested in that quiz. So try to think of it from a couple of different ways. First of all, it's for the new listeners that find the show. Mm-hmm. And then secondly, it's for the existing listeners who haven't taken action yet. The ones that have taken action, or the ones that have decided that's not for me, they'll just disregard it. And, it's a quick little couple of minutes at most. I mean, a call to action to really be about 30 seconds in an episode. So they're going to be okay with the fact that you mention it, right? They understand, okay, you got to mention your stuff. But for those that haven't taken action yet, most people need, and I mean, I think this might even be a bigger number now, because back in the day, before we had so much digital stuff coming at us all day long, it was like 7 touch points that someone needed before taking an action. It might be more now. So think about that with your existing listeners or your newer listeners. They may need to hear that a few times before they're like, oh yeah. So in other words, it's a reminder for them. So focus it more on the fact that, okay, I need to do this for new listeners that are finding this show, and then also existing listeners who haven't taken action yet.
Yeah, cool. And maybe a bit of a technical question, but what about sort of date-specific call to actions, like, an event or something, but then the listener comes 6 months later and the link that is there is not working anymore, or it's obviously past?
I love that you're thinking about this. So if it's something that you mention in your episode that's date specific, then I would switch that link to a wait list afterwards. Like have that link, whatever they're clicking, it can redirect to a wait list page, especially if it's something you're going to offer again. If not, it can redirect somewhere else. The other thing that I would recommend, though, if it truly is date sensitive and it's like a one-time thing, it's not like a recurring workshop that you teach, once a month, or something like a launch that happens a couple times every year. If it's truly only going to happen one time, use that as dynamic content. And that would be like the recorded, it's an ad technically that you would record, and then it just gets attached to the beginning, or it could be the middle, or it could be the end of your episodes. I usually like to put mine at the beginning. And that is a great way that if it's just time sensitive and it's only going to be really, truly relevant for a few weeks, you can have it on for those few weeks, and then you can just take it right off without having to edit any of your content. I always say good rule of thumb to follow is make sure the links that you share in your episodes are evergreen links so that they're not broken links. But if you were to have, let's say, like a recurring workshop, because this is me, I have, a workshop that we teach. Sometimes we're teaching it back to back, months over a time. Sometimes we take a break. So it just kind of depends. But that workshop link will always be there. But if we don't have a live workshop, it will go to a wait list.
Oh, this is a great tip. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so let's talk marketing then for the show, because you're doing a lot of things right. You're doing a lot of things right with your content, and nurturing your existing listeners. Let's talk about getting the show in front of new listeners. So podcast SEO will definitely help, and I want to lay that as the foundation. But knowing that your time is limited, we want to make sure that we're getting in front of the right person, because they're going to be the most likely to convert to listen. So we'll see the most growth from that. But then also that it's not something that's going to take up like a ton of your time to execute. Yes. Okay. So I have a couple of ideas for you, but I will preface this by saying, and this is across the board, any marketing strategy that we ever test on our show or in our business, give it at least 90 days. Because one of the mistakes that I see people make is that they'll try something and then they'll decide 3 weeks later that it's not working. When in reality, we don't have enough data yet to know if it's working. We haven't given it enough time. So I like to build marketing strategies. And when we're building a growth plan for a podcast, there might be multiple strategies or tactics that we're kind of combining into one full marketing plan for a show. But I always want to make sure it's aligned with that host's budget, bandwidth, make sure it's things they actually like to do, because if you don't like to guest on other podcasts, well, then I don't want to give you that as a strategy to follow for 90 days, and that it's something that you can consistently execute for 90 days. So that, speaking of sweet spots, right, to be as productive as we can be. So let me ask you, just to kind of get a quick sense of what you enjoy and what you don't. We know you don't like social media.
Yep.
We know video is not going to be the thing. Do you like guesting? Do you like writing?
I do.
What do you like? Tell me what you like.
I like guesting. I like writing. I want to guest. It's just capacity-wise hasn't been, I haven't been able to do much. I've done a couple. I've started doing sort of podcast swaps with some guests who also have a podcast. But yeah, guesting is definitely on the to-do list.
Yes. Okay. I would say, and when we're working with a client, typically my recommendation is, if you have the bandwidth to pick 2 things that you're doing consistently. So it might be two tactics that we're combining and testing over that 90-day period. So one of those might be guesting, and then the other might be podcast SEO. Or one of them might be swaps, and the other one might be spending time on Reddit in threads with your ideal person and you're answering questions, right? It could be any number of things, but we want to narrow in what those things are. If 2 feels like too many, we just pick one. So you're dialing in the podcast SEO. We know you want to do guesting, but capacity is kind of limiting there. Do you think that doing one guest episode on another podcast a month, would that be doable? That'd be like 3 guest episodes in a 90-day period.
Yeah, I think it's that little kick that I need to get into the gear of guesting. But yeah, one episode.
Well, and to be fair, guesting does take some legwork. There are definitely some great platforms, like Podmatch is a fantastic platform. If you're on that platform, if you're not already, I would look into it, where it matches podcast guests and hosts. So it makes the pitching process a lot lighter than having to like research shows and find someone's email address and like craft a pitch and then send the pitch and then follow up. This kind of takes a lot of that out of the process. And for you listening right now, if you're like, Podmatch, this sounds amazing, I'll link to it in the show notes. But that's a great place to start because it helps to save some time on the front end to actually book those interviews. The other thing that you could do is you could go to raphonic.com/graph. Raphonic is a paid tool, but the graph tool is free. So if you go to raphonic.com/graph, you can type in your podcast and it will show you, based on your listeners, the other podcasts that they listen to. And it's really awesome because then you could kind of see like, oh, wow, they're listening to these marketing podcasts or these parenting podcasts. And that can kind of help get your wheels turning in terms of, well, now, maybe that would be a podcast. Where could my expertise fit? Perhaps that should be a niche that I guessed, on those podcasts. If you type your podcast in and you don't see anything popping up, all it means is you just don't have quite enough volume yet, but you can maybe pick a competitor podcast or a podcast that's similar to yours and type that one in and kind of see a similar pattern emerge, based on where those listeners are listening. And then it's a matter of just being on those shows and having a very specific topic that you speak to, something that ultimately will drive them back to your podcast and or into your business. The other thing, though, that I want to share with you, you mentioned swaps, and I am a huge fan of swaps. I love swaps, and swaps can take a number of different shapes, forms. You might have heard me call them collaborations before. I refer to them sometimes as partnerships. But for the swaps that you're doing, are you doing like audio swaps right now, or how are those taking shape?
The couple I've done is basically the interview part that we've recorded. I share that audio. And then she would go on and record her own intro, outro, whatever it is, to make it more sound like her podcast. Yeah, that's basically what we've done.
Something else that would be a lighter lift would be to do, we call them ad swaps, but it's essentially like a little mini trailer of your show that would be inserted into another person's podcast that is, they've got your audience, and then a little mini ad from their show inserted into your podcast. So you're essentially cross-pollinating and cross-promoting to each other's audiences, but it's 30 seconds and it's easy to work into an episode where you can say, oh, and by the way, I have this great podcast to recommend to you. You've got to go check out this podcast. And then that little clip can play and then you get back to your content. So it's a lighter lift than, say, going to guest on other people's podcasts or even doing an interview swap. That's a much lighter lift, so you can even consider that. Something else, since you mentioned you like to write. And I've mentioned this to a few people recently, and if you've listened to other coaching episodes on the show, you might have heard me mention this, but I'm just a huge fan of it, and it's newsletter swaps. And it's becoming a permanent fixture in other people's newsletters that go out to their audience. Now, maybe that means that you are kind of like a guest expert that appears every once in a while and you write a piece of content for them. Maybe it's a little segment that they have in their newsletter where they're just literally plugging one of your episodes that you've already created that fills a content gap for them. So I would say pick one or two of these things that feel exciting to you and see which ones you feel like, okay, I could commit to that over the next 90 days. And then depending on what they are, essentially all of these are going to start with a list of potential people that you could collaborate with, whether that be guesting or an ad swap or like a newsletter swap. And then just start reaching out to them. Break it down into little bite-sized chunks and commit to, I'm going to send 3 outreach emails a week. Or I'm going to send 2 outreach emails a week. Whatever that might be. It doesn't have to be like this huge volume, to where it feels doable, that you could do it consistently. And you will definitely see some return from that. You will have people that are excited to collaborate with you. And then when you do those collaborations, you will see growth from that, particularly because even though as an organic strategy, it's going to be more targeted to your ideal audience.
I love that. Little ad swap sounds really exciting. I think this is definitely something I haven't heard of, and it's and I already have a number of people who I think would be interested in doing it, where, we have collaborated in some way, and maybe a full-on podcast episode is not really what we want to do, but yeah, swapping that. And newsletter swaps I've done years ago. I haven't done any in a while, but I guess it's something to come back to. And I love the app that you mentioned, and the Rayphonic, because I always, like, when I think about the guests, I'm like, how can I be specific and make sure I reach the right people? Because I don't want to spend my time talking on a podcast and then there's the one person. Well, one person is great too, don't get me wrong, but
I know, I hear you. And that's kind of the challenge of any marketing strategy, is that you could go out there and put a billboard up, but it's not necessarily going to reach your right listener. You could spend money to get your show in front of them, but I don't know, paid ads kind of have this weird way of, once you stop paying for them, the traffic stops coming. So I'm a big fan of organic strategies, but we got to match it to your bandwidth. And so, matching that to your bandwidth really is the key.
I love that. And I think for me, before coming on, and why I wanted to come on with you and do this, is like, if I don't want to do more social media, I felt like, what else is there? Besides guesting, I know I should be guesting and all of that. But no, I love that you gave me a few other things that are actually really interesting and quite easy to do, because I'm good with like reaching out and building connection and that kind of thing. And then, like suggesting some collaborations. That feels really good. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Yes, lean into this, especially if you are good with that outreach and with the connections and building that network. This will be one that you will enjoy and that you'll see a return from. Any marketing is going to take a little bit of legwork, but when that legwork's aligned to something you actually enjoy and you're starting to see a return from it, then it becomes something that you can stick with. And then over time, you'll start to see that payback in terms of your podcast. If we were to narrow it in and say, okay, next 90 days, let's focus in on this, I would say that's going to really set you up for success.
Awesome. Love it. Thank you so much. I've got a lot of new ideas, and I feel excited to actually go and do those things, because I felt a little bit stuck around there. Like, what do I do to reach more people?
Yeah, I love it. Well, Anne, thank you for being here today, just for being transparent and open and vulnerable and sharing, your podcast journey, where you're at with your podcast journey. It's just been an honor to sit here and get to have this conversation with you. So thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you. You're part of the reason why I started the podcast. So I really appreciate all the work you do, and that I had the opportunity to come on with you.
Oh, well, that gives me a full circle moment for all the energy and effort that I put in. So thank you for saying that. I appreciate you so much.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much.
And if you're listening to this right now and this was helpful for you too, I would love it if you would just take 30 seconds and leave a review on the podcast to let me know. Or if you're sitting there and you're like, oh my gosh, I want to get in the hot seat with you, Courtney, in a future episode, then get on our waitlist in the show notes so that you are the first to know as soon as we open up some more spots. And speaking of borrowing others' audiences to grow your own, most podcasters want more listeners. But in reality, they're sharing their new episodes with the same handful of followers and wondering why their downloads aren't moving. The truth is, your best growth is going to come from getting in front of new audiences, and specifically other people's audiences. And if you're like, okay, Courtney, great, but how do you actually go about doing that? Then stay right where you are, because I have got a very special guest joining me, and we are going to break down exactly how to do it next to help you make your business binge-worthy.